In an earlier video on star forts in Copenhagen, which is linked in the description, we looked at 3 star forts commissioned by King Christian IV in the first half of the 1600s. But there is an older castle farther north in Denmark called Kronborg, also with a star-shaped foundation. Kronborg is located on the northernmost tip of Zealand. It began as a much smaller castle and fortress called Krogen, originally built in 1425 as a sort of toll booth regulating maritime traffic between the Baltic Sea and the Øresund, a channel of water that will take you south to Copenhagen. In 1558, Krogen's bastions were improved and built up by King Christian III, who was Christian IV's grandfather. And 16 years later, in 1574, Christian III's son, Frederick II, expanded Krogen into the larger castle of Kronborg we see today. The expanded castle and the improved star-shaped bastions are visible on this map from 1577. Alan and I visited Kronborg a few years ago, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's also the Danish setting of the Shakespeare play Hamlet. These are portraits of Frederick II and his son Christian IV. And here we are standing on Kronborg's flag bastion. This flag bastion is almost square, as we can better see in this map from 1733. Comparing the 1577 map with the one from 1733, we can see that 2 of the bastions have changed. Here, the northwest bastion on the left has been elongated in the map on the right. The same is true of the southeast bastion. These changes likely took place during Christian IV's renovations, after a fire at Kronborg in 1629. Using Google Earth, we can get a better snapshot to measure the angles. The 2 original bastions are closer to square at 78 and 84 degrees, but the elongated bastions are now at 54 and 59 degrees. And like we saw at Rosenborg, dissecting the bastions through their center, or mise, they line up with tower spires on the castle. My suspicion is that the original bastions looked something like this, and that they aligned star tip to star tip with the 2 spires on the northwest corner of the castle. This alignment may have needed to be changed for some reason, perhaps because the bastions weren't aligning through their center or mise. The shape of these bastions that we see all over the world is the same shape we see here, the large face of this truncated triangular trapezohedron. I want to thank my friend and fellow Baconian researcher Daniel Spino for showing me this 1514 engraving by Albrecht Dürer called Melancholia. Dürer was a well-known artist and engraver of the 14 and 1500s. The shape that's depicted here is called a Dürer solid, similar to a Platonic solid because its vertices all intersect the potential boundary of an encircling sphere. My partner Alan literally plays with solids like these. He's a 4-time world champion in the sport of footbag, and oddly enough, he spent a lot of time in Copenhagen kicking in front of a 13th century church, you can see on the left, which likely was putting off a fair amount of tangible energy. As he was traveling throughout Europe and the world, promoting and demonstrating the sport, he would stitch footbags to earn money. He used his interest in geometry to design bags that would perform in certain ways, for stalling, the net game, etc. The prerequisite, though, was that any geometrical design had to form a symmetrical spherical shape. The original design of the hacky sack brand was similar to a softball, but Alan experimented with many different designs in which he used straight lines and angles in the form of triangles, squares, pentagons and hexagons, even octagons, to form a sphere. This is the concept behind a platonic solid, firm shapes that will form a sphere-like shape in which only the vertices intersect the sphere itself. Alan is also a woodworker and constructs solids like this one he made into a lamp. But when using something pliable like fabric, the entire construct can conform to the shape of the sphere. Alan is sort of a savant when it comes to these spherical constructs, and can tell you how many of each polygon a sphere contains simply by looking at it. A typical soccer ball is made up of 20 hexagons and 12 pentagons. But Al's more complicated designs involve bags like this. And this one, a 452 panel design. Alan has designed and stitched countless spheres made up of straight lines and angles, a geometrical combination the Freemasons held in specific high regard, symbolized by their depicting the square and compass together. Which brings us back to Dürer's engraving, in which a winged woman sits next to a geometrical stone. She's holding a compass prominently, while many other discarded tools lay at her feet. This engraving almost feels Masonic, but it's missing a square to go along with the compass. Let's take a closer look at the Dürer solid. Its largest face is really just an elongated pentagon. The viewer's perspective from the side distorts it, so I've approximated its true shape based on the lengths and angles in Dürer's engraving. The angles of this elongated pentagon are 64, 114, and 124. These don't seem to fit any pattern we've seen so far. We can, however, flatten this pentagon into a triangle, retaining each of the side lengths, and this does fit a pattern we've seen before, a Masonic pattern. We see that this woman is holding a compass, a Masonic symbol, but in all of these scattered tools lying at her feet, there's no corresponding square to go along with the compass. That's because the square is actually hidden in the elongated pentagon that can transmute into a right triangle. Is the year 1514 a little early to be encoding Masonic symbols? Not really. German Masonic lodges were very active in the 14 and 1500s. So what other clues are hidden in this Dürer engraving? The winged woman has 5 keys. Because she's holding a compass, we might surmise that the 5 keys in the engraving are likely to be round. And sure enough, there are 5 relevant round orbs to be found. The O in Melancholia, the sun, the sphere, the circular purse clasp, and a round nub on the largest key. We can draw lines from these orbs to various eyes. First we'll draw a line from the letter O to the little eye hole in the piece of wood at the bottom of the engraving. Another line can be drawn from the round purse clasp up to the eye of the cherub. It dissects the compass in its exact center or mise, and this line is exactly parallel to the first. If we draw a line from the center of the sphere through the eye of the dog, we end up at the pivot point of the compass. Next, we can draw a line from the purse clasp to the round key nub. This line is also exactly parallel to the line between the sphere and compass. Notice that the line from the purse to the key forms a 64-degree angle, which is identical to the angle of the tip of the elongated pentagon. And because the 2 lines involved are parallel, That means we also have a pair of 64-degree angles here. If we continue the line from the sphere up to the woman's face, we arrive at the woman's forehead, her third eye. This generates another pair of 64-degree angles here. If we now draw a line through these two vertices of the polyhedron, we arrive again at the woman's third eye, which is a spot confirmed a third time by extending the line up to the sun at 34 degrees. And why is 34 degrees important? Dürer placed a magic square above the woman's head in which every column and row of numbers adds up to 34. And if we extend the line from the sphere through the woman's third eye, the line enters the magic square in the box containing the number 15, then touches on the numbers 7 and 8, which add up to 15. So what's the significance of all these parallel lines and specific angles? In my research involving the harmonic series, these angle values can correlate to positions in the series and to the notes of B, C, and C sharp. The 64-degree angles of the polyhedron and parallel lines are all highlighting the note of C. If we then mark the next few octaves of C on the grid, we end up at 16. The number 34 halves to harmonic 17, the note of C sharp. And the number 15, or the 15th harmonic, corresponds to the note of B. These three notes sit next to one another, the prominent note of C flanked by its neighboring note on either side. I discuss in my book, The Next Octave, that C and the first harmonic represent the power of two and the matter-based world. So all this geometry in the engraving is to highlight that material world, as opposed to the realm of spirit. This engraving is not about spiritual pursuits, it's about a physical energy, and we know that from its title. Other researchers have pointed out that the word melancholia here is spelled incorrectly, but I suspect something else is going on. I think Dürer's title is a combination of two Celtic words, melon meaning yellow, and colia, a word etymologically associated with the concept of glowing. Melancholia is a yellow glow, as illustrated by the sun right next to it. The sun or soul would be represented musically by the letter G, central to Masonic symbolism. I believe that Dürer was encoding a reference in this engraving to the concept of glow discharge illumination, something not officially discovered until 1675, but something Masons seem to have understood much earlier. Credit again goes to Daniel Spino for making me aware of the electrical arc, which I also think is being depicted here by Dürer, not only in the engraving itself, but also in the musical notes he's encoded into the three highlighted numbers of 64, 34, and 15. And it's these electrical properties that Dürer is connecting to the shape in the polyhedron, the elongated pentagon we see in so many star forts around the world. Mainstream historians have a different explanation for the pointed shapes of these star fort bastions. They argue that the pointed shape was defensive and necessary to eliminate dead zones. But it seems that Dürer would not have agreed with this explanation. We know this because he wrote a treatise on the fortification of cities. Here we see the title page of his essay that features a sheep hung up by the waist, or as the Greeks would call it, hung up by the mezi or mies. In his essay, Dürer recommends only round bastions as efficient fortifications. Nowhere in his work does he ever depict a star-shaped or pointed bastion. I believe this is because pointed bastions had a completely different purpose. All the star-pointed foundations we've seen have aligned with spires, which could have functioned as antennas to harvest ions from the upper atmosphere. Dürer further confirms this theory in his 1494 watercolor of the Innsbruck Castle courtyard, in which we see antennas and wires on one of the castle's spires. It's also possible that Dürer possessed this knowledge that he may have been gifting to a potential group of Masonic brothers in Germany because of his own heritage, descending from Eastern European or Tartarian Moors, as is suggested by the presence of a Moor on his coat of arms. And I suspect it was this information, passed along by Freemasons to Christian IV, that informed the elongation of these bastions to align with the spires of Kronborg Castle. It's quite possible that the elongated bastions allowed both for better alignment and for longer length of the transmission lines. And if you're still not convinced, check out this still shot from drone footage over Kronborg. The side of this elongated bastion isn't the simple brick-lined wall we normally see, but instead we can just make out the presence of some type of mechanical workings, a sight the public was likely never meant to see. I'm grateful for any feedback. Please leave your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching.